right. Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started with tonight's program. I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. My name is Eric Rogers, and I'm the manager of digital engagement and communications at the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. And we're really excited to have so many people joining us this evening, including a lot of people that we're meeting for the first time. So we want to give you a little bit of context before we dive right into tonight's presentation. So Frank Lloyd Wright doesn't need much in the way of introduction. He's widely considered the greatest American architect, and he had a prolific and innovative 70-year career, resulting in around 500 buildings. He's the only modern American architect who is recognized on the UNESCO World Heritage List, an honor that the Conservancy played a leading role in securing. It's a safe bet that everyone watching recognizes at least two or maybe three of the buildings that are included in the inscription. You're here to learn about our new visual identity, but for it to make sense, you need to know, what is the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy? The short answer is we're a nonprofit organization based in Chicago, working nationally and even globally, wherever Wright buildings stand. About 35 years ago, a group of people, many of them you see in this photo, came together with a vision to create an organization focused solely on safeguarding Wright's remaining built work. And we've been at it ever since. But this is what keeps us up at night. This photo was taken in 2018 in Whitefish, Montana. It shows the demolition of Wright's 1958 Lock Ridge Medical Clinic, which we tried to save. Despite Wright's fame, roughly 15% of his buildings have already been lost. And of those still standing, nearly half could be demolished tomorrow. The fact that Wright is so famous does not automatically confer any protection on the buildings. Hence, our mission. We facilitate the preservation and stewardship of the remaining built works designed by Frank Lloyd Wright through advocacy, education, and stewardship and technical services. So what does that actually mean in practice? We talk about our work in terms of three pillars. Technical services include working directly with the stewards of Wright buildings to support their ongoing preservation. We provide them with technical information and assistance, sometimes very hands-on. And we also hold and enforce 26 preservation easements, which offer the strongest form of legal protection available for buildings. Advocacy means publicly making the case to preserve Wright's buildings. We help find preservation-minded buyers who will steward them into the future, and we celebrate the people who do the most to preserve them with our annual awards. We also respond directly when a building is threatened, working with partners and going to the media if necessary. Perhaps our most current, urgent advocacy situation is the 1903 Walser House, pictured here on Chicago's West Side. It's been vacant for nearly 5 years. It just emerged from a protracted foreclosure process, and we're hoping to get it into the hands of a new steward who can restore it and return it to productive use. Of everything we do, our educational efforts have the widest reach. They include our website and online presence, our print publication, Save Wright Magazine, and also events. And indeed, we have a busy calendar of both online and in-person programs, which you can find on our website. I want to highlight our two major in-person events this year and share a few photos. Our spring tour, Out and About Wright St. Louis, goes on sale to the public next Tuesday, if our members don't snap up every ticket first. And registration will open in June for our annual conference, which is happening in November in Scottsdale, Arizona. The best way to appreciate Wright's work is to experience it in person. Not only to see it, but to move through it and to engage it with all of your senses. Thanks to the relationships we foster with the stewards of many Wright buildings, we're able to offer unique access that few other organizations can. Our tours provide exclusive opportunities to visit spaces which inspire us to think differently about the power of design. In the breadth and the diversity of Wright's work, We see a brilliant designer grappling with the ever-changing ways we live in the world, seeking to create spaces that more deeply connect us to nature, to beauty, and to each other. Wright's buildings inspire us to innovate, to take risks, to use design to elevate the experience of daily life. There's so much we learn from them, and that's why the Conservancy's work is so vital. We want these buildings to endure and to continue to inspire future generations. That's why we do what we do, and that's why you should join us, both at our events and in our work. We are a membership organization. Our small staff can do a lot, but we can't do it without our members. So I encourage you to learn more about the benefits of membership at saveright.org/join for those of you who are not already members. And for those of you who are, thank you for your support. Now, turning our attention to tonight's event, a few housekeeping notes before we really get rolling. I want to encourage everyone at any time during the program to please use the Q&A tool to put a question in front of our speaker, and we'll have some time for discussion at the end of his presentation. If you would like to see automatically generated closed captions, those are available. They're generated by Zoom. Just look for the option to show captions in your Zoom client. Finally, the event is being recorded, and you'll all receive an email with the link to view it anytime after it happens. So with that, I'd like to invite our speaker tonight to join me on screen. Hello, Garrett.
Hey, Eric.
This is someone who has probably seen way too much of me in the last year, but I think it's been a really fruitful collaboration. And I'm so excited for Garrett to dive in and share really the process that Order took us through to develop this new visual identity. Garrett, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Hey, everyone. Excited to dive in. Yeah, there's quite a bit to get through. Like Eric said, this will be sort of a recap of the process that we went through. But to start, I wanted to do a little bit of just context for who Order is, who we are as an office. So I'll give a kind of brief overview of how we came to be. So our office was founded by Jesse Reed and Hamish Smythe, who prior to starting Order worked at Pentagram, another design agency, their New York office under a designer named Michael Beirut. And there they did a number of different projects, all generally centered around identity design in a number of different spaces, from education to financial to cultural organizations, sort of everything under the sun. And one of their earliest collaborations together was on a publishing imprint called Standards Manual. This is still something that we practice as an office today, but it began with the publishing of the New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standards Manual. And this was something, they would tell the story much better than I would, obviously. But this was a really significant piece of design and how it, influenced not only New York, but signage systems become. They found this book and wanted to share it with sort of the world. So they took it upon themselves to publish it into a manual. That eventually led to publishing a number of different books, all generally under the same lens of archiving significant pieces of graphic design. The NASA manual was one that came after. And since then, that's sort of grown into a larger publishing imprint that captures not only significant pieces of graphic design, but maybe pieces of design that aren't as common. So this book, for example, is a collection of many different national park maps. And to date, there have been 15 or so, make sure I do my math right, books that are published under it. Again, it's still something we do as a significant part of the office today, but it's something that we feel like is important in sort of the identity of Order. So after that began, or after that founding, Jesse and Hamish started Order, where they sort of extended the practice of the work that they'd been doing at Pentagram. And here at Order, we take a similar lens into how we think about identity design. We take a very kind of practical focus into the work. It's all very research based, and we try to make systems that just have a lot of utility. So these are some projects that we've done in the past. We recently did an identity system for Herman Miller. Years ago, we did a project for MoMA, and I think this one was, again, a really good representation of just how our office functions, in the sense that this system was really built around the function of how MoMA needed to present their different seasons. And then other times, our work is focused around individual designers, and we can lean on our kind of publishing knowledge and take it forward into client work as well. So yeah, altogether, our practice is really identity design focused. These are a number of different projects that we've done, over the years, and each of these sort of shows up in a different way. And, we take a pretty broad lens into the types of clients and partners that we work with. Sometimes they're very large organizations. Other times it's folks down the street from our office. So we try to keep it just very varied for how we like to work. There are a few other different kind of arms that I'll kind of briefly touch on here of just part of our work. So a kind of offshoot that we developed in collaboration with a studio in Seattle called Shore is a program called Standards. This is an online brand guidelines platform that allows identity guidelines documents to be kind of living and breathing websites, as opposed to kind of static PDFs. So this is a place for those to be built. And then we also run a type foundry where we publish commercial typefaces. So these are a number of different typefaces that have been designed by various designers that have been released through the foundry. So we keep ourselves pretty busy at Order. This is our office in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where we work every day. Our team is very small, so there are only 5 of us that work out of the New York office, and we kind of keep it that way by design. It sort of allows for hopefully a really strong relationship with the folks that we collaborate with. And again, what we do is sort of, a number of different things, all generally under the lens of identity design. Identity design is a very broad space, and it can show up in a number of different ways, whether that's packaging or motion languages or type design. So we try to kind of use it as a kind of catch-all term, but knowing that each project is unique. I included this here. These are kind of pillars of what we believe as an office. These are things that we practice kind of on a day-to-day basis. They're pretty integral to the process that we work through, and you'll see this as we get into the work a little bit. But we try to approach everything from a very honest perspective. We're very kind of transparent with the folks that we work with, and we want them to be transparent with us. Again, everything that we develop is research-based and systematic. The idea is it's very practical, and we always say we do everything for a reason and never decoration. So that allows the design to really be an extension of the utility it needs to have for the people that we're building the systems for. So generally speaking, at kind of the highest level, how we work is we start with the research. That means again, a lot of different things depending on the client. Maybe it's a dive into history, maybe it's understanding the space or kind of the industry that they operate in. And that is also kind of an exercise in understanding what they want their design language to communicate. And from there, we go straight into exploration. So we're taking everything that we're absorbing and we're hearing, and we're finding different ways that those can show up visually, and sort of translating that directly into the design process. After that, we start to kind of distill things down, internally on our end, and try to identify the ideas that feel like they're the most successful, or they have the kind of most legs for the future. After that, we present. And then from there, it's sort of an unknown for how things will go. Sometimes you get it right the first go. Other times there's a little bit of kind of back and forth and a refinement process that will happen with our collaborators before we ultimately deliver our kind of final set of designs. So I think this is a helpful kind of framework for what I'm going to walk through today. I think this presentation is kind of a collage of different parts of that process that we work through with the Conservancy. So these are kind of snippets of presentations that we gave, and the final case study that I think paint a pretty good picture of, yeah, again, like Eric said, the process that we went through and how the final system was developed. So with that, yeah, I'll get into our work for the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy. So this is kind of a nuts and bolts slide here, but this is how all of our presentations start. This project was separated into three kind of large phases. The research phase, identity development, and guidelines and applications. And we dove a little bit deeper into that and kind of broke it down just to set up where that or what all of those kind of phases could really look like and what they mean. So design is the kind of final end goal and the final piece of the project. And it's important to remember that that final design is a process of refinement. Even if that first presentation goes great, there's still refinement and development that happens through applications and guidelines and the development of the system with real content. But of course, importantly, all of that is informed by research and strategy and this kind of immersion phase that comes before all of the research. That's sort of, I think, in a lot of ways, the most important part of our process is just understanding the landscape. So for this project in particular, there were three kind of big areas that we framed our research around: the past, the present, and the future. So where we've been, where we are now, and ultimately where we want to go in the future. So that started with a look back to the past. This meant for us kind of doing a really deep dive into Wright's life and his career, and really trying to get an understanding of his reach and the impact of his work and how people have kind of interacted with it over time, how it's changed over time, and sort of what that kind of timeline ultimately looked like. It's important to note that this timeline and this exercise was very incomplete. And I say that just to mention that we by no means became proper kind of Wright scholars through this process. We, of course, did our due diligence, but I think to fully understand the breadth of his work is just something that would take quite a bit of time. But this was just a really helpful exercise in sort of getting our bearings. We were obviously familiar with Wright before this project, but this allowed us to have a kind of deeper dive into places that we didn't quite know. But it also gave us some really important initial observations. So again, there's a really rich and complex history and legacy to understand with Wright. It's not just a building, but there are all these kind of stories that go back into the years. The principles that guided his work are things that are very kind of deeply rooted. Again, these aren't just kind of buildings out in the world, but they're things that were kind of shaped and designed really with people in mind, in the sense that there's a real kind of influence or impact that they were kind of sought to have for the people that would move through these spaces. The influence and the impact that his work has had on architecture and kind of the field of design is incredibly vast, and sort of goes without saying. I think people interact with buildings probably on a daily basis that have been influenced by Wright in one way or another, whether they know it or not. And then last, his work is not always recognized properly, either in how it's protected or how it's discussed, the stories that are told. It's just something that, again, is very complex, and we wanted to be just very considerate of that as we moved through the process. As part of our kind of historical dive, we went to the Avery archive and got kind of a hands-on look at a number of different materials that gave us just a really unique perspective on things that we'd only seen photos of before. So it lets you know the texture of them, the quality of the paper, all those kind of things that you really experience in a kind of physical setting that you just can't kind of get through a screen. And you start to see all of the textures of things like drawings, and you kind of get this understanding of material. One of the especially unique pieces that we got kind of a glimpse into was the correspondence that Wright had, and this was how we would kind of discuss projects or kind of go back and forth with the people he was working with. And this was just a really kind of interesting thing for us to kind of absorb here in just understanding what the process for making some of these buildings might have looked like. alongside all of those different materials. So, again, there's sort of a lot here would be maybe its own talk just to go through all of these materials, but it was a really kind of in-depth look at all of those kind of initial things that we were looking at in our kind of timeline process, but we were sort of getting to see the real thing, which was sort of invaluable, I think, to our process. Next, the kind of big area that we looked at was the present. So we're looking at how all of these things show up in today. And, in kind of today's world, rights buildings are sort of interacted with in a number of different ways. Some of them are gallery spaces or public offices, that, things that people are kind of generally using and moving through. Others have sort of gone through, a little bit of an evolution where they may have started as something, like a residential space, but have now sort of moved into something that's a little bit more kind of public facing that folks can go visit. But then, of course, there's also spaces that are still under private ownership. A lot of people, of course, still live in these buildings today. And then the kind of last and unfortunate piece of this is there are some that have been kind of lost to time, as Eric kind of touched on. Unfortunately, some of these buildings have been demolished over the years. And supporting all of Wright's work today, there are a number of different organizations within that landscape. Each of those are kind of focused on different areas. Some are really centered around particular properties or kind of a singular location. Others take a more kind of high level view of Wright's legacy and his sort of overall impact. But the Conservancy is unique in that it's the only one dedicated to the preservation of all of Wright's remaining buildings. And like Eric kind of touched on, that work kind of shows up in a number of different ways where the Conservancy is providing resources and expertise to the stewards that allows them to take care of these spaces and allows them to sort of, move through them in a way that's sort of respectful and taking into consideration the amount of time that they've been there. The advocacy work helps to bring rights work into the kind of public arena, whether that's something like a lawsuit or a kind of legal battle of defending the building, or the kind of physical experiences of going to a lot of these spaces. This work just sort of allows rights work to ultimately be something that's just very public and sort of open for people to access. And the education aspect of it is similarly just very crucial in how it shares the stories that go into all of these spaces. Again, when we think about the full timeline of Wright's work, there's a lot of stories in each of those, and I think that just allows the legacy to be as rich as it truly is through their work for or in the kind of education space. But all of that work goes a little bit deeper in the effect that it has for the folks that interact with it. It starts to really build this kind of sense of community around the work that the Conservancy does, not only at the kind of local level, but also on the kind of global stage. Like Eric mentioned before, this kind of designation into the World Heritage sites is just something that's an incredible achievement that the Conservancy has played a very significant part in, and they're doing that sort of at both ends of the spectrum on the kind of global and local scale, and that's just very significant. So the question for our work then sort of becomes, how do we identify the building conservancy within this landscape? And I won't go kind of too far into this today, but there's a lot of different kind of visual cues that we need to be considerate of when we're talking about brand design in the Frank Lloyd Wright space. There are a lot of kind of familiar themes that we wanted to just be considerate of, is maybe the best way to put it. Things that we wanted to just be mindful of, whether to lean into or lean away from, not only for the core identity elements, but also in how we build a kind of full system that they can take to all of the materials that they make into all of those different areas of advocacy, education, preservation. How can we make this brand something that's very systematic in how it shows up? Key parts of that are their things like their mission and vision. A lot of the language that I'm, kind of already using and describing them, that came directly from these kinds of statements. And this gives us just a really clear lens into the work that they do in the kind of simplest terms, but also the goal of the work for the kind of short term, as well as the kind of big picture. And then in how we kind of translated that to a brand system, There were a few different benchmarks that we kind of talked with, the folks at the Conservancy about that we knew this needed to hit, right? Things like relatability. There needs to be this kind of emotional aspect to how the system works, and in a way that feels kind of true to the emotion that the spaces themselves evoke. There needs to be some very clear meaning conveying, what they do. There's a level of equity that we need to kind of bring forward, both with the Conservancy and Wright. There needs to be a flexibility for how this identity shows up. So again, that kind of systematic aspect to it, not just in the mark, but in the full world of the brand. And then obviously there needs to be a very kind of strong connection to Wright, not just in spirit or literal reproduction, but something that feels ultimately just very true to his work. And then with each of these kind of angles and each of these kind of pieces in mind, we did a little bit of a kind of deeper dive into what each of those really means as it relates to this project. So when we talk about relatability and emotion, what we're really doing here is kind of striking a balance between all of the different audiences that the Build a Conservancy needs to consider, and really trying to understand the level of knowledge that each of them brings to the table. There are obviously folks that have a lot of knowledge about Wright and his work, but there might be people who are very new to it. So how do we kind of balance each of those ends? When we think about meaning and conveying what they do, I think for us that really meant there needed to be a very clear and understandable idea driving the system. So something that feels very obvious in what it's trying to say when you look at it. With equity, this is another place where we needed to be just very mindful of how we started to kind of explore it. So we're not trying to literally interpret something, but we're trying to capture the ideas or the story of Wright's work. Flexibility, I think, I kind of touched on this earlier, but this is really the systematic view that we take into the brand system. And then the connection to Wright, this is, again, a kind of balance that we were looking to strike here, in that we need to be true to Wright, but we also need to find a way that the Conservancy can stand out and kind of create something that feels very unique and ownable to them within the space. So all of those kind of pieces in mind, we kind of mapped them back to the different audiences that we're kind of, trying to speak to here in different ways. And again, kind of filtering each of those through what their concerns are, what their levels of knowledge are, and how we can kind of create something that would, potentially really resonate with them. And so each of these different kind of, audience buckets all had, things that were just unique into how they would interact with the Conservancy's work. So folks like homeowners have a very kind of technical lens into the Conservancy. They're probably thinking about things that that they're interacting with on a kind of daily basis. Things like upkeep or maintenance. So that's a very kind of technical perspective. Wright enthusiasts are people who have probably really strong opinions about Wright's work, and that's something that we need to be sure that we're carrying forward through this. We obviously don't want to alienate anybody through this kind of process. We actually want to kind of do the opposite, in that we're embracing them and making sure the Conservancy gives them space to be as big of a fan of Wright's work as they want to be. And then these few other buckets are where we're kind of looking at folks that might have a little bit less in-depth knowledge of all of those different stories of Wright's work, but they might resonate with his work for different reasons, whether that's from a kind of purely design perspective, from the kind of environmental lens, or the kind of impact that the spaces have in how they can start to kind of influence how you live your life. So all of them would resonate with the work, but they might have, or they might kind of require a kind of broader way into how we showcase Wright, and kind of the different levels of symbolism that we might use in the identity. But the goal here is to kind of think about all of these, audience buckets individually, as well as find a way that we can unite them together and create an identity that kind of links them, but gives us enough kind of levers to pull in how we could start to kind of lean into each of those different kind of areas. So all of that in mind, we started to look to the future and kind of think about what comes next for the Conservancy, and where could we ultimately go through this project. And again, with the this kind of project, our goal is to build on everything that's come before. We're not throwing out all of the work that the Conservancy's done, but we're trying to find a way that we can leverage it for the future and kind of adapt and evolve it. So for the identity, previously the way that things were made was generally kind of on an as-needed basis, where materials are starting to be built kind of one by one, and you're sort of creating a network that is connected. And this isn't necessarily a bad or negative way to do it. It actually allows the system to grow very organically. But I think with this project, it sort of is a moment where we can kind of start to take a little bit of a step back and think, could we align all of those pieces to a very kind of central idea? And could we use that idea to build those kind of core elements that sit kind of at the foundation of the system? But then as it starts to expand and we think about functional elements like typography and color, could we think about those as really an extension of the core idea that's translated to an identity? So as we start to get to things like imagery, design, composition, photography, all of them are in support of that kind of central idea. So it allows the system to be something that can grow and evolve organically and naturally, but all in support of very kind of clear principles that we're trying to communicate within each kind of element in the toolkit. And then with this kind of project, we wanted to be, again, really mindful of the role of identity design. This is a very design literate space that we're working in here. There are folks that have, probably a lot of design knowledge of their own. So we wanted just to be clear about what identity design is, so that we're just being clear about the purpose that we're trying to serve through this exercise. And identity design is very different from architecture in the sense that there's not often this, wow factor when you look at a logo where you think, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. This is going to change my life forever. Logo and identity design often just doesn't have that quality like something like architecture, where you go into a space and there's this kind of wow moment in the kind of impact that it might have. But it is like architecture in the sense that it lives with us, it grows with us, and it's something that evolves over time. So like a space that you go into every day, a logo could be something that you look at every day. So it kind of has this ability, hopefully, when kind of done best, it has this ability to evolve and change alongside you. So we wanted to just be clear that identity designs and it builds meaning over time. Something is created through a project like this, and it's designed initially. But once it gets implemented, that's when it starts to get combined with real world content, things that actually has meaning outside of the kind of isolated process that can sometimes happen with identity design. And then over time, that's something that allows the identity to carry meaning for the audience and the people that it serves. And that's what allows kind of a brand to create, a true identity and not just be, a logo that you might see on a booklet or social media, but it allows it to be something that lives on and continues to grow with the system. And so we felt like this was a really important angle into this project in how we can start to kind of create really just the relationship of brand design to the larger work that the Conservancy is doing. And it's important, to remember that, new is different. We're talking about a lot of history and a lot of legacy that we're trying to carry forward, and we're trying to introduce something new. But the hope is that, at least with this project, different is something that's very good and ultimately in service of the things that have come before it. So all of that is to say, we kind of broke down a few different considerations for the things that we were thinking about, what we're doing, where it shows up, who it's for, how we're approaching it, and why the potential directions that we were proposing could work. What we were doing is very kind of simply translating the work that the Conservancy does to an identity. Where it shows up is alongside existing organizations and the kind of broader landscape beyond. Who it's for audiences that are both familiar and unfamiliar with Wright's work. We're sort of taking a very broad lens into that. How we're approaching it is through a design language that's very systematic and clear. And why it could work with each of the proposals that we made, we felt like it was important to give it time and just remember the role of a brand design in the larger landscape. So then the sort of big question becomes, what's the idea? What are we proposing? What's the system that we're building? And so what we included here is a collection of different initial sketches and ideas that we had. Most of these Eric and company did not see. We left a lot of these on the cutting room floor, but we thought this might be an interesting place to allow some of them to get their moment or kind of resurface in a very kind of brief way. So, you can see how we're starting to translate form and research into symbols and shapes that we could start to kind of leverage in a system. So some of these early ideas were maybe a little bit experimental and rightly left on the cutting room floor. But this one, for example, we were looking for letter form shapes in architecture. And could we think about all of the different spaces that Wright created and find a kind of sense of identity within them. Others that we did ultimately present, like this direction, we were taking kind of a different way into translating architectural form to typography. So this one uses a kind of cantilevered approach from the buildings and translates it to the work of the Conservancy. And then that was something we could have potentially extended to all of the different locations. So maybe this is a little bit more of a kind of flexible approach to the system. Others, we started to think about the materials and the textures and the kind of geometry that you would see in a Wright space, and started to kind of translate that to its own unique graphic language. So this kind of illustrative style that we're kind of creating a relationship between with the typography. Could that be something we start to kind of build from? Others kind of dug back into Wright's history and what sort of set him on a path of architecture. And you can see, a number of the ideas there, were really helpful, but a lot of them, at least in their kind of simplest forms, just weren't quite right for what the system needed to be. And so here we kind of come back to where our kind of final project ended up. And here we're looking back at the spaces themselves and really thinking through the various ways that they've been used over time, and asking, is there a way that we can start to kind of translate all of that in simplest form, and what might that look like? So we're kind of taking a little bit of a step back in our process and reevaluating what it is that we need to say and how we can say it. So how do we start to kind of capture that impact? And is there a way that we can do that builds on the forms that we see in all of these spaces, embraces this community that the Conservancy has created and built over the years, and the importance of protecting all of those things for years to come, all while honoring the legacy of not only Wright himself, but the reach of his work, all of the different ways that it's shown up in the world around us, and the impact that it's had really on the world kind of at large, but also all of these kind of individual places as well. So is there a way that we can kind of translate all of that into singular form? So what we did here was kind of take each of those and filtered them through this kind of familiar shape of the square. This is something that we saw throughout all of Wright's work. It's something that he used as a signature. So we felt like it was a very kind of clear way that we could capture all of those different ends and represent the community that's been built through all of them. But to bring the Conservancy's work back into it, we removed just one of those squares, and that highlights the impact that the loss of just one has on that broader community. And it speaks to not only the work that the Conservancy does, but the urgency and the necessity of it for years to come. So this was the kind of anchor, that big idea that I mentioned before, for our system. So a way that we're trying to capture all of these different ends in something that's recognizable, has the utility that we need it to, but also has the flexibility and how it can adapt and what it could mean, not only for today's world, but also for years to come. So it's something that's very rooted in the history of Wright and the legacy of his work, but also the contemporary kind of action that the Conservancy is taking. So these are a number of different kind of materials that we started to kind of apply the system to. You can start to see how that symbol becomes this really kind of foundational piece for how we start to apply the visual language. It shows up as the kind of key piece that identifies the Conservancy's work, and we start to kind of build, a broader toolkit around it. So from there, all of our decisions around the identity system sort of used that as a starting point. So for something like typography, we're asking a lot of the same questions of how can we capture Wright in his kind of legacy, but also kind of translate it to the work that the Conservancy is doing. So like I kind of touched on before, our trip to the archives gave us a really kind of unique perspective on materials that Wright made or that have been made in support of his work. So here we're kind of looking at all of the different typefaces that are used. And I think in all of our initial proposals, each of them sort of spoke to this in a slightly different way. But one that was used kind of most frequently was a typewriter version of Vogue. And this is one that Wright used specifically in his correspondence with partners and collaborators and in his sort of written written materials. And today there's an updated and kind of remastered version of this typeface from a type foundry called Optimo, and they sort of identified that relationship that Wright had to this particular kind of typewriter version of the typeface. So it's sort of all of the pieces kind of aligned for us to kind of start to bring this into the system in how it sort of captured the unique quality of all of these different typefaces, from how certain characters are drawn down to the details of the kind of geometry that you see within each stroke. So things like the chiseled corner all captures that sense of kind of texture and materiality that we were sort of after with the typography. And the version that we're using in the end is a customized version of this typeface, which isn't one that's changed in design. We didn't alter the construction of any of these characters, but what we did here is sort of arrange a particular set of alternates for some of the letters that allowed a kind of unique default set for the Conservancy to use. So things like the lowercase a and the lowercase e were just really important to capture that kind of quality of the era that we were after. So those were things that were just crucial for us to kind of maintain in the kind of final delivery of the system. So here you can start to see how we're testing it out. And again, the role of this typeface in the system is kind of a subtle way that we feel like we're bringing the voice of Wright in some ways to the work of the Conservancy and the system that we're building. It's not something that's mimicking his handwriting or anything like that, but it's sort of echoing the communication that he had and allowing it to kind of live on through the system that we built. For color, this was a place that we looked back to the kind of texture and the materials of the spaces themselves. I touched on the color red earlier. That's something that, again, has a very kind of clear role in the legacy of Frank Lloyd Wright, but is that something we could start to expand past? Again, if you think about the work that the Conservancy does, it's not just about a singular person in a lot of ways or a singular location, but it's about the community and all of these individual spaces. So could we use color as a way to capture that texture and the materiality and the experience of some of those places? So we started to kind of expand past the color red, but still kind of kept that very much as a part of the palette, and then used the full color family that we designed as a way to reflect how light might move over those materials or move through those spaces. So each of those individual colors has this kind of depth to it, from a lighter tone to a darker tone and a couple of steps in between, that's sort of, again, referencing or building on how light would move through a space. And that gives us a lot of flexibility for what we can do with color as it applies to the system. It's, on the surface, a level of kind of expression that we can add to the palette, but it also serves a very functional role in that it builds on imagery that comes around it. So sometimes, we're leaning into things like photography to do, kind of all of the talking in terms of the visual expression, but other times we can use things like color and typography to reinforce it or kind of stand in place of it when we're not using a photo. So it's just a way to kind of create, this kind of dialogue between all of the different elements in the system, from photography to typography and color, and the way that all of those things are being used together. And then the shapes within the symbol are something we can start to kind of use as a foundation for continuing to expand on the system. A kind of uh, look back into the history of Wright's interest in architecture. The story goes that this sort of began with a gift from his mother of a set of Froebel blocks, and this is something that sort of started his journey into architecture and captured his kind of imagination early on in the sense of how you could start to kind of build things to create new things. So is that something we could start to kind of leverage in this system, and could we do that in a way that's building on the ideas that we see in the mark? So we expanded past just the square as the kind of singular element that we're using and started to build this kind of full library of different shapes, all coming from the set of Froebel blocks. And this gave us the ability to, bring in other spaces into the identity and allowed us to kind of move past just a very singular logo, but create something that kind of brought in all of those other properties into the identity. So here you can see this kind of illustration library that we built out with each of those shapes. And all of these are sort of building on or referencing a particular location. On the kind of construction level, they all share the same kind of geometry or chiseled corners and things that we see in the typography. So there's this harmony that all of these shapes kind of have with one another. But again, the hope here is that in application and in the system, now the identity can be not just about any particular location, but there's actually tools that we have to celebrate and highlight individual locations when the materials need to be made for that particular location. So again, a way to kind of expand past just something like a logo, but create this kind of full visual language and full system that's all in support of everything that the Conservancy is doing. So here you can see a number of those different tools kind of adapting to the different pieces of content. I think, another important part of this system was the flexibility that it would have, both for the range of content and the types of kind of tones that we needed to communicate. So sometimes the system is very reserved, and that could be something that we use for materials that are a little bit more kind of serious in tone. But the system is designed to have steps in between where we can start to be a little bit more expressive for with how we use typography and how color starts to be applied to it. But then we can start to kind of dial things up a little bit more. We can use the identity as sort of the hero element, as this kind of big visual interest piece, but we can also get more expressive when we start to incorporate things like illustration. And there's sort of, a number of steps in between and hopefully beyond, and the materials that the Conservancy will make will, hopefully continue to push the bounds of what this system can do. But as we designed it, the hope was to have just a lot of flexibility to kind of capture everything that the Conservancy does, from things like conferences to litigation or real estate posts or sort of everything in between. And then the last piece for the identity system was looking at how this logo and how this how this identity could provide a framework for extension. So here we're looking at a way to kind of flip our thinking on the symbol itself, but adapt it for the Save Right publication. So here we're sort of using the exact same structure in the symbol, but taking a slightly different spin into how we kind of talk about the missing square. So here we're highlighting the square that is to be saved, and that was the sort of concept for the symbol and how it could adapt to Save Right. So this is the publication that the Conservancy produces as kind of one step away from the Conservancy kind of core identity, but very much a very clear extension of it. So there's kind of, again, this dialogue that these two symbols have with one another, but there's still the ability that they have to stand out kind of on their own. So here you can see kind of a collection of different things that were made throughout this process, each sort of leaning into different pieces of the toolkit. And then the very last kind of piece that we developed here was the guidelines document. So this is a very kind of technical piece that gets into how all of these pieces can be used, what their kind of role and function is. But this is sort of the document that we developed as a collection of all of the decisions that were made throughout this process, and that allows the identity to be, again, the kind of core piece of this system. But as you start to kind of zoom out, you can see how this creates, a full visual language and a full system, and kind of this full world for the Conservancy that gives them something hopefully that will continue to evolve and grow as they do and as their work does. Yeah, I know we're only kind of hearing from me today, but this was very much a result of the effort of many other people. So these are, a number of the different folks that we talked to throughout this process that all sort of were really crucial in providing us the perspective that, we needed to get the project where it needed to go. Eric, Jeff, and Catherine, this project wouldn't have happened, frankly, without their support and collaboration throughout. So, a huge thank you to them. And then on the order side, Megan, Jesse, and Laurel all were just crucial into making this project what it is. So, yeah, thank you for letting me talk you through it. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Garrett. This is a whirlwind tour through what was certainly the first rebranding kind of identity development process that I've ever been involved with, and I'm so lucky to have done it with such a talented team at Order. And then I'm also very grateful that you shouted out all of the people that you really had in-depth conversations with on our side, because there was so much that went into this. And we have had a few questions come in that I would love to put to you. A couple of people have asked about the timeline.
Sure.
So if you want to talk a little bit about kind of how long it took and how that compares maybe to some of your other projects.
Sure, yeah. I would say in various ways this project was the length of last year, but I would say the bulk of the work that we did together was around a 3 to 4 month period, and that is including around a month for our immersion and our research, and then that kind of back and forth and development of the final system is something we worked through for a couple months. Things start to kind of trickle off in that process as the final system gets developed and you start to build out things like applications, and that's where on the Conservancy side they sort of take the reins and implement elements within the system. So I would say, generally speaking, around 4 or 5 months of kind of really hands-on work, but can span the length of a year when you talk about the implementation of the final system.
Yeah, I think I remember our first real like substantive dive in being in January of 25 or maybe
Yeah.
December of 24. Um,
Yeah, I was
but
dipping back into the archive photos that we have from the Avery, and I remember being cold when we took all of those pictures.
and look where we are again.
Yeah.
Somebody also asked on the design side, was it just you kind of doing the design work solo, or was it kind of an all hands process inside the office?
Yeah, so the way that our office generally works is one designer will work on one project. This one was a little bit unique in that Laurel Warner on our team helped develop some of the initial concepts that we looked at. And Jesse sort of acts as the kind of creative director of the studio, so he's also very involved. But then as we started to kind of get into the process and certain directions are selected, it just makes sense for one designer to kind of tackle it from there. So a little bit of a group effort for parts of it, and a little bit of a kind of single person effort for others.
Sticking with the theme of time, the question that just came in was the question of the element of time in establishing or building a brand identity, and how it sort of has to be inhabited and used to become rooted. Can you talk about maybe other examples where that's the case and how you explain that to clients?
Sure. Yeah, I would say generally in the field of identity design, the example that gets brought up maybe more than anything else is the Nike swoosh, which is by no means a product of order, but something that people often talk about as a logo that has all of this meaning. But if you look at the forms and when this was originally designed, it didn't have all of that. But I think time has played a really important role for everything that that symbol has kind of come to mean for people, how it's sort of taken on the different activities and the different products over the years, the way that it's sort of influenced the way that people live and their activities. So yeah, I think time is sort of a really crucial factor in how an identity can carry forward, real material that's made with it. I kind of touched on this earlier, but the logo that we, created for the Conservancy has this story kind of at surface value, but the hope is that as it shows up alongside something like the conference, that would be something that, you start to associate with it. And that's a thing that is really a product of time and implementation. So, there's a balance that you strike with identity design where you're trying to capture certain ideas at the outset, but content, time, all of those things have to be kind of accounted for to give the identity sort of space to breathe and live on after it.
So a few more questions that I would sort of group together as getting at the early phase
Sure.
of the project. How important was it for you to connect and build relationships and hear from kind of the people that you interviewed, that list of names that you put up early in the process? And are there any particular insights that you got from that really shaped and came through the process?
Sure. I would say that this project just wouldn't have happened had we not had all of those conversations. I think all of those were so important to understanding the work that you all do as a conservancy, what it actually means, what it looks like, the way that your role as an organization shows up for people like homeowners. What are they concerned about? What are they thinking as they are stewards of these properties? All of those kind of stories and insights really kind of directly shaped where we went with the system. So yeah, it sort of kind of goes without, it's almost hard to kind of capture just how important all of those were. But those relationships and those conversations are also really important to building the trust that a project like this really needs. We couldn't come in and say, hey, we're Order, here's this great new logo. We hope you like it. That's just not exactly how these things work. We actually need to kind of build that dialogue because that logo wouldn't be so great had we not had that dialogue.
Yeah, and I do think, in those conversations, we had so much institutional memory and
Yep.
long-term knowledge going back to the pretty early days of the organization. And,
Mhm.
we had active participation
Sure.
from people that shaped what our old identity looked like.
Yeah.
That I think was really crucial in setting the direction. We obviously all didn't always agree on every decision that
Sure.
got made along the way, but um,
Yeah. Yeah, well, and another really important part of that is hearing what individual people respond to in Wright's work. If we're talking about finding that through line between all of these different audiences, we couldn't find that if we didn't talk to members of that audiences. Why does a homeowner who lives in a Wright property, why did they want to do that? Why is that important to them? What effect does it have on their life on a kind of day-to-day basis? That's a perspective that we just can't have as people who don't live in Wright homes. So it's yeah, just really important to kind of hear those sorts of stories firsthand and bring them into the identity.
So a couple other questions about the early phases of the process before we
Sure.
move on more to the product. And I'm surprised I don't know the answer to this. Did you actually visit any Frank Lloyd Wright design buildings as a part of this project? And if so, which ones?
I did. There are the ones in New York that I've been to. So Guggenheim sort of was an obvious answer. The one that I did make a trek to was the Westcott House. So Marta was very kind in showing me around, but that's semi near my hometown in Ohio. So while I was visiting family there, I made a drive out to it. Obviously, there are many more that we would have liked to have gone to through this process, and there are many that I hope to visit. But those two were particular kind of informative for this project in particular, and in that kind of timeline that we're talking about.
So in your process, was there overlap between the research and the early design work, or was there a clean break between those phases?
Yeah, there's definitely overlap. I would say that the research and the exploration and kind of the initial presentation, we're talking about them as very clear, separate steps. Very much a gray area and how those are developed, and I think that's a very good thing because as you start to find pieces of research or ideas that you find exciting or that could work for the identity, you sketch them out on your notebook, but then you can start to see different areas of opportunity in how that idea actually takes shape in something like a logo or symbol. So if you take that piece of research and you start to think how you can translate that to shape or typography, in that process of doing it, you might see, a new avenue. And then you go back to the research and think, oh, I know that I can create a symbol here. I know I have this letter to work with. So I think allowing them to kind of inform one another is actually really important to finding new opportunities and to kind of allowing the process to build organically. And I think the same is true with a presentation. I think on the very functional side, there's kind of a gut check that happens if we don't know how to present something. It's probably not a decision that we should make for the identity of the system. But it also kind of allows us to really hone in on the story or the concept of what the identity is trying to communicate if we build the presentation or the way that we're talking about it alongside the system itself. They really just kind of strengthen one another, I think, when they happen side by side.
When talking about that ideation process, a couple of questions there. One kind of a tech question almost. Do you do mood boards or stylescapes as part of your process?
We don't actually. So we have a very strict no mood board policy at Order, and the reason we don't do that is because what we're trying to build is a very kind of direct connection between the final project and the clients that we work with. And with things like mood boarding, we often find that you're referencing things that were made for other clients or other people for other situations. And there could be, helpful reference points in there, but ultimately that was something that was just serving an entirely separate purpose. And so our hope is to kind of create something that's just very grounded in the space that we're working in. And we've always found that mood boards lead you outside of that in a way that we just don't want for our process.
But were there any design concepts that got dropped early on that you were particularly disappointed that we moved away from?
um, Yes, there were. The typographic concept. I guess I should say that knowing that I think all of the decisions that were made along the way were the right ones. So that's by no means something that I should separate myself from the final identity system. But I did feel like the concept that we had that was using typography as the kind of blocks of architecture had a lot of utility to it. I thought it was really interesting in how it could adapt to different places in a way that was also very informative. You're starting to kind of illustrate with things like letters that just kind of inherently carry information. So I think it did a similar thing to our kind of final system in the end. So I guess I'm not too upset that it was kind of lost along the way. I think we still learned a lot from that direction. And I think it was right to kind of leave it where it was. I think it wouldn't have had something like a symbol, which in the end was very important for you all and for the kind of final system.
Yeah, I think the ability of that symbol to serve as a pivot point
Yeah.
between our main identity and save right and to kind of be used expressively, it really offers a lot of flexibility. And we still ended up with typography that is itself very distinctive and a really important part of the brand. So
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the typeface that we used in that direction was Reply. It's the one we carried forward. So we did bring a lot of that direction into the final version.
Well, and speaking of the typeface, we had or possibly still have Giuseppe Nardiello from Italy thanking us for uh, talking. I think he was. Oh no, I'm sorry. Why did I think I? That's a. I thought he was with the Type Foundry. I am
Oh,
so
no
sorry.
worries.
Um, it's been a long day. Here's a question that I need to take notes about, a little bit of
Sure.
a technical question. Could you talk about the layout or the grid system that's at work in this identity?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, a grid system is something that does change depending on what it is that you're making. So I think for this identity, there's not necessarily a this is the grid system, but it's more of this is how we would use a grid system. So what we're using it as here is something that just allows us to use all of the pieces in the identity as kind of building blocks. So when we shift around things like typography or we start to scale up the logo, those are all snapping or aligning to the grid. And that kind of just maintains the relationships that all of those have to one another. So there's not exactly this kind of hard and fast rule of always 3 columns and 4 rows or anything like that. But it's something much more high level in the sense that if you have a piece of typography, it should align to the photo underneath it. So it's a very kind of simple and fundamental rule that we're building on here. So it's nothing too complex, but hopefully something that's very easy for you to use in the end.
It'll take me a while to internalize all 98 pages of the guidelines, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
So a couple of really nice comments. I think there's a lot of excitement about the little depictions of buildings using
Hmm.
the block shapes. And that's something that I think that's been one of the last pieces to gel for us as we kind of try to button up our work together and then go forward into implementation. One of the questions that came up, Shristi Singh is pointing out that some of them may not be obvious to the audience unless
Sure.
they already know the building, and that's actually
Hmm.
something that we've really grappled with as we think about how we want to use those.
Hmm.
But I think our answer to that for now is that we are probably going to use them only in context that
Yeah.
makes them evident.
Hmm.
We've kind of made the decision that we're not going to treat them as abstract design elements to just
Hmm.
sprinkle around as much
Yeah.
as we kind of wanted to. And when we
Sure.
started doing mock-ups on our website, it's like, let's put some little buildings around, and it didn't end up making sense.
Yeah.
Um, but I think we're really excited, that really gets at that more expressive and fun and playful
Hmm.
end of this system, which is something that we've never had before and that I'm going to have to learn how to work with.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and your earlier question about time and I think that's where that, plays a very important role for you all with this system in particular. Yeah, if you were just using them now, they might have, or they might not have the appropriate content alongside them that sort of creates that relationship for an audience member to know what that building is. But, down the line, when you start to use them alongside, a real piece that's being made for, a particular building, then you start to create that dialogue. So I think that's a piece that, the hope there is that it grows very organically, and it's not something we could have kind of predicted at the outset of this project of this is when you use the illustration of the Guggenheim. That's sort of not what they're designed to be or do. But the hope is that they show up alongside materials that you will, inevitably make for individual places.
yeah, I think it's a safe bet that we're going to really pursue using them in alignment, at least with our annual conferences. I think that's kind of the obvious place that we're thinking will go, where it's a big enough event that it makes sense to really give it its own kind of presentation. There was another question about them, which is, are they available for all sites? How many are we up to now that you've done?
Oh, 20 something, close to 30, I think was the sort of final set. So I think that's for you to make the call on of how you would want to use them, but they're very fun to make. We can keep making them.
Well, unfortunately, we've got a couple of people on our side of the fence who are excited to kind of play with the system and maybe
Sure. Yeah.
maybe push the envelope a little bit with which shapes are in the palette
Yeah.
to give us some different roof profiles. I think that's been the biggest sticking point on a few of the buildings. So
Yeah.
um, well, I think we're getting close. Well, really, we're a little past time, but there have been a lot of questions, and it's been great. A few questions about kind of what people might be able to see. A specific question about getting a link to see standards, the publications imprint that Order has. Is that something that we could share in the post-event email?
So standards and standards manual are two different things. One is the standards is the guidelines builder, the online guidelines builder, and
Okay.
standards manual is the publishing imprint. So I know that the names are a little tricky. So yeah, we can share links to both of those in your follow-up email.
Okay. I think I'll ask you to kind of give a selection of links maybe to the kind of key things, and we'll include that in the email that we'll send out tomorrow to everyone.
Sure.
Um, And then a few people have asked, and I don't know how to answer this question. And so I think this will be a conversation for offline about if there's any way of sharing our own guidelines that you developed for us. I know there's still a little bit of a moving target, and that's a question I've never been asked before. So I don't know how the Conservancy officially feels about that idea.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say they're for the most part designed to be an internal document, and I recognize the hypocrisy in that for being at a publishing imprint that publishes other people's brand guidelines. But ultimately, it's a call for you all to make if that's something that you want to distribute. It's really meant as something that people who are making and producing materials as a part of the Conservancy will find helpful. So it's generally not something that's distributed on any kind of larger scale. But there are public guidelines. I briefly showed our project with Herman Miller at the very beginning. Those guidelines were built through standards, and those are public for anybody to check out and take a look at. So public guidelines are sort of becoming maybe a little bit more of a common thing. So
Interesting.
yeah, I couldn't say specifically for these guidelines, but maybe.
Well, it's an idea that we'll turn over a little bit. I don't have an immediate answer on that, but
Sure.
it's really exciting to kind of get to work with them, and it's given me a whole lot of new tools and challenges, which hopefully everyone that's come to this event has noticed. Our website looks different, our emails look different.
Mhm.
So I think we're getting our new membership cards tomorrow. So things are kind of working through, and will continue to over probably the next 6 to 9 months. It'll take
Yeah.
us to, do a magazine redesign and all kinds of other things. But um, yeah, the future is really exciting with this, and I think it presents a lot of possibilities. Um, so yeah, I think we'll kind of end it there. I want to thank you so much, Garrett. I mean, you've given so many hours of presentations on this project, and this will be the last.
We'll see.
Um,
Yeah.
but it was really great to get this kind of look back at the whole thing and how it came together and how to make sense of it. And yeah, I think now we just move forward further into implementation.
Yeah, thank you so much for everything throughout this project, for the opportunity to talk through it again here. I think like I said before, this really wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the work of you and everybody on your side. So I think that trust and collaboration is just paramount to where projects like this go. And yeah, we can't wait to see what you all do with it and how you continue to shape where it goes from here. Push the boundaries, break the guidelines. We'll be watching with a lot of excitement. So
Good,
yeah,
good.
really appreciate it.
The main hope is that if I'm breaking the guidelines, I'm doing it with intentionality. So we'll see
Yes.
how that plays out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us and sticking around for a little extra time, but we will call it a night.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
everyone.